The colony world of Hesperia was a quiet and beautiful place. Far away from the noise of Earth, its green fields stretched to the horizon, dotted with farms and small towns. People had come here to start new lives, to raise families, and to escape the troubles of the inner worlds. For years, Hesperia had been a peaceful home for more than 2 million settlers. Children played in the streets, markets were full of fresh produce, and ships came and went from the small spaceport without fear. Life changed in a single day. It began without warning. A strange shadow appeared in the skies above Hesperia. At first, people thought it was just another trade convoy passing through. But soon, reports began to flood in from the outer settlements. Unidentified ships had entered orbit. They were not broadcasting any signals of peace. They did not answer hails. The local defense fleet, only a few patrol ships, moved to intercept. They never had a chance. The Tsar Confederacy had arrived. Their ships were unlike anything the people of Hesperia had seen before. Dark, sharp, and bristling with weapons, they hung in the sky like predators. Without a word, they began to fire. Energy blasts rained down on the surface, tearing apart farms, homes, and entire towns. The colony's defense ships fought bravely, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. One by one, they exploded in bursts of light. On the ground, panic spread. Families tried to reach the spaceport, but the attack was too fast. Shuttles were destroyed before they could launch. Communications were jammed, cutting the colony off from the rest of human space. In the city of Port Arlen, where the spaceport stood, Captain Mason Hill tried to organize an evacuation. He shouted orders over the roar of explosions, guiding civilians toward underground shelters. But even the shelters could not protect them from the relentless bombardment. In a matter of hours, the green fields of Hesperia turned to blackened wastelands. The skies were filled with smoke and falling debris. The people who had come here for peace now ran for their lives, many never reaching safety. By nightfall, entire towns were gone. The Tsar showed no interest in taking prisoners, but they destroyed everything, as if they wanted to erase all trace of human life. From her office in New Geneva on Earth, President Laura Mitchell watched the incoming reports in disbelief. At first, she refused to believe that Hesperia was under full-scale attack. But as the data streamed in distress calls, orbital scans, and the last desperate transmissions from dying ships, her shock turned to fury. The Tsar had not made demands. They had not opened talks. They had simply come to destroy. The news spread across Earth and its colonies like wildfire. In crowded cities, people stopped to stare at the breaking broadcasts. In remote mining outposts, workers gathered around comms units to listen in silence. Everyone knew someone on Hesperia. Friends, family, old neighbors, millions of lives. Now gone. The grief was heavy, but beneath it, something else began to grow. Anger in the United Earth's Assembly. The delegates were united in a way they had not been for decades. Political rivalries and disputes over trade and territory were forgotten. In an instant, the massacre of Hesperia was not just an attack on one colony, was an attack on all of humanity. When President Mitchell stood before the assembly, her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with rage. "They have struck at our people without mercy," she said. "They believe we will be too afraid to answer. They believe we will turn away. They are wrong." The assembly chamber erupted in applause and shouts of agreement. Even leaders who had once argued for peace at any cost now called for war. The attack had left no room for doubt. The Tsar Confederacy was a threat to human survival. And humanity would answer. In military command centers across the Sol system, orders went out. Shipyards began working day and night. Crews were called back from leave. Reserves were activated. The great fleets of Earth, Mars, and the moons of Jupiter would come together. This would not be a small retaliation. It would be the largest mobilization. in human history, but as the war preparations began, the images of Hesperia stayed in the minds of everyone. Satellite scans showed nothing but ruins. The once blue rivers ran dark with ash. The fields that had fed thousands were gone. Entire. Generations had been lost in a single day. The thought of it lit a fire in the hearts of soldiers and civilians alike. On a quiet street in Chicago, an old veteran named Grant Lawson stood outside his home, watching the news on a neighbor's screen. He had fought in smaller conflicts before, but he had never seen anything like this. He clenched his fists and whispered to himself, "They're going to pay." Far away, on the deck of Earth's largest orbital station, Fleet Admiral Daniel Carter received his orders. His voice was calm when he spoke to his officers, but deep down he felt the same burning anger as everyone else. The Tsar had made a mistake. They had thought humanity would break. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous. Fleet Admiral Daniel Carter stood at the heart of Earth's central orbital station, watching the planet turn slowly below. His uniform was spotless, but his eyes were hard. For days, he had been reading reports from Hesperia. He had seen the images of its destruction, the ruins where cities once stood, the broken remains of its people. Each time he saw them, his resolve grew stronger. The time for mourning had passed. Now it was time to act. The orders from the United Earth Assembly had been clear. Every available ship was to be called into service. Every dock, every shipyard, every repair station in the Sol system was to work without rest. The goal was simple but massive, to bring together the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. In orbit above the moon, massive shipyards glowed with activity. Sparks flew as crews welded armor plates to new warships. Engines were tested, weapons loaded, and systems checked again and again. Old ships that had been retired were brought back into service. Civilian freighters were refitted with armor and guns. Even small patrol craft were armed and readied for war. On Mars, the shipyards. Around Olympus, Mons were alive with noise. The red dust hung in the air as workers hauled supplies day and night. Huge transports moved between assembly lines, delivering engines, shield generators, and missile racks. There was no break, no pause. Only the endless drive to finish the next ship. Across the system, recruitment centers were full. Men and women lined up, willing to serve. Some were soldiers already, called back from leave. Others were civilians who had never worn a uniform, but after seeing what had happened to Hesperia, they were ready to fight. Training programs were shortened, but not carelessly. Every new crew member had to learn fast. There was no time to waste. Captain Aaron Whitfield was among those called back to duty. He had been on a transport mission to the outer colonies when the news came. Now, he stood on the deck of the heavy cruiser Valor, watching as fresh recruits arrived. Many were young, their faces tight with determination. Whitfield knew most of them had never seen battle, but he also knew they carried something powerful inside them, the will to protect their people. In the command halls of the orbital station, Admiral Carter met with his senior officers. They stood around a large display table, the holographic projection showing the vast reaches of Tsar space. Red markers showed known Tsar fleets and bases. Blue lines marked the planned human movements. The plan was not just to defend, it was to strike deep into enemy territory and destroy their ability to attack again. Rear Admiral Sophia Blake, known for her sharp tactics, leaned over the display. "We hit them here first," she said, pointing to a cluster of systems on the edge of Tsar space. "We draw their fleets away from their homeworlds. Once they commit, we cut their supply lines. Then we move in for the final blow." There were nods around the table. Everyone knew it would not be easy. The Tsar had strong defenses, and their ships were fast and deadly. But humanity now had something the Tsar could never match. Unity born from shared loss. In the great shipyards of Jupiter's moons, some of the largest warships ever built were being prepared. Dreadnoughts the size of cities floated in dry dock, their massive guns capable of tearing through enemy cruisers in a single shot. Carriers were loaded with wings. Of fighters, their pilots eager to prove themselves. Supply ships, troop transports, and repair vessels joined the growing armada. President Laura Mitchell visited the orbital station to see the preparations for herself. She walked through the docking bays, speaking with engineers, pilots, and soldiers. Her words were simple, but carried weight. "We are not going to them in fear," she told a group of young recruits. "We are going to them because they think we will not fight back. They are wrong, and you will prove it." As the days passed, the fleet grew. Hundreds of ships became thousands, and thousands became hundreds of thousands, from every corner of human. Space vessels arrived to join the armada. The skies above Mars and Earth shimmered with the reflections of warships in orbit. Crews worked without rest, running drills, loading ammunition, and checking systems over and over. The people of Earth watched all of this unfold. In cities and towns, they saw the great ships pass overhead, bound for the gathering point. Children stood on rooftops to wave as the ships roared past. In the hearts of the people, grief was slowly being replaced by hope that justice would be done in the quiet hours of the night shift. Admiral Carter stood alone on the command deck, looking out into the darkness of space. He thought of Hesperia, of the lives lost, of the promises made to those who could no longer speak for themselves. His voice was low, but every word carried the weight of a vow. "We will make them remember us," he said. "We will make sure they never do this again." Somewhere far away, the Tsar Confederacy was still celebrating their victory. They did not yet know what was coming. They did not yet see the storm building, but soon they would. The fleets began to gather above Mars, filling the space around. The red planet with thousands upon thousands of ships. From small, swift corvettes to massive dreadnoughts, the armada formed like a great tide of steel. In the sunlight, their hulls shone with sharp reflections, like an endless ocean made of metal. Admiral Daniel Carter stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Titan, and watched the growing formation. Every day brought more ships from the far reaches of human space. Freighters turned into gunships, patrol boats upgraded with new weapons, and brand new warships fresh from the shipyards all took their places in the lines. Docking stations around Mars worked without rest. Shuttles moved between ships, carrying supplies, weapons, and crew. Fuel lines snaked across docking arms as engineers made final checks on engines and shields. From the ground, people could look up and see the bright points of light where ships glided into position. Captain Aaron Whitfield and his crew aboard the Valor had been running drills non-stop. The young recruits, though tired, moved with precision. Whitfield walked among them, offering quiet encouragement. He knew that once they left Mars, every person on board would be tested. There would be no turning back. Rear Admiral Sophia Blake commanded a group of fast-strike cruisers, each designed for speed and heavy firepower. Her ships practiced formation changes in the open space beyond Mars, their engines flaring bright as they weaved in and out of attack patterns. Her voice over the com was calm and sharp, guiding her captains with exact instructions. Families had come to the Martian cities to see their loved ones off. In the domed capital of New Ares, crowds gathered near the spaceport observation decks. Children pressed their hands against the glass, watching warships drift past like giants. Many tried to smile and wave, but the truth hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew that some of those ships would never return. Inside the Titan strategy room, Kata met with his senior commanders. A large holographic display showed the fleet arrangement. Different colors marked the squadrons, with each group assigned to a section of the attack plan. Supply convoys, escort ships, fighter wings, and repair craft all had their roles. "We are ready to move on my command," Carter said. "The Tsar will know we are coming. They will try to stop us before we reach their core worlds. We will not let them." Sophia Blake nodded. "The faster we move, the less time they have to gather their forces. We hit them hard and keep moving." Other captains agreed, their voices carrying the same determination. No one spoke of retreat. No one doubted the mission. On the surface of Mars, supply depots emptied as cargo ships carried their loads into orbit. Crates of missiles, racks of rifles, medical supplies, and food were packed tightly into storage bays. Automated loaders moved with tireless speed, stacking equipment for the journey ahead. News broadcasts showed the fleet as it formed, and across the colonies, people watched with pride. The destruction of Hesperia had been a wound to all of humanity, but now the wound was hardening into a weapon. Commentators spoke of the largest fleet in human history, a force that would cross the stars to deliver justice. On board the Titan, Carter took a moment to walk the ship, past engineers checking reactor systems, pilots running final simulations, and gunners cleaning the barrels of the railguns. Everywhere he went, crew members straightened and saluted. He returned each salute, knowing the weight each of them carried. In one of the crew lounges, a group of young sailors were talking quietly. One of them, a woman named Kelly Rhodes, clutched a small photo of her family. "I just want to make sure they never go through what Hesperia went through," she said. The others nodded. It was a common feeling among the crew. Above Mars, the armada stretched further each day. Ships formed ranks like soldiers on parade, their positions locked in by careful calculations. Fighter squadrons zipped between the larger vessels, practicing defense and escort maneuvers. The sight alone was enough to send a message to anyone watching. Humanity was united, and it was ready. As the final days of preparation passed, the mood among the fleet shifted. The rush of gathering and organizing slowed, replaced by the heavy silence of waiting. Everyone knew the next step would take them into enemy space. They checked their systems again and again, not because they expected something to fail, but because it was the only way to keep their hands busy. Carter stood once more at the bridge viewport, watching Mars slowly turn below. His voice was quiet when he spoke to his second-in-command, Captain Olivia Harper. "We have them all here," he said. 700,000 ships. It is more than a fleet. It is a promise. Harper nodded, "And we will keep it. Somewhere beyond." The darkness, the Tsar, waited. They believed their attack on Hesperia had broken humanity's spirit. But above Mars, in the endless expanse of stars, the truth was clear. Humanity's spirit had never been stronger. Asterisk. The human armada left Mars in perfect formation, moving like a single giant machine. 700,000 warships cut through the black of space, their engines leaving long trails of light. The fleet was silent, but the tension inside each ship was strong. Every crew member knew that the first battle was coming soon. Admiral Daniel Carter stood at the center of the Titan's bridge. The main display showed the fleet's path into Tsar-controlled space. Blue lines traced their route, but there was a red cluster ahead in new ships. Intelligence reports had said the Tsar would defend the border fiercely. Carter expected nothing less. On the Valor, Captain Aaron Whitfield checked the readiness of his crew. He walked past the gunnery stations, where crews sat strapped into their seats, hands hovering over controls. In the hangar, fighter pilots were already inside their cockpits, helmets on, engines warm. Whitfield stopped beside one of the fighters, speaking to a young pilot named Marcus Hale. "Stay sharp and stay with your wing," Whitfield said. "Don't go chasing glory." "Sir," Marcus replied. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his nervousness. Rear Admiral Sophia Blake's cruisers moved ahead of the main force, their sleek shapes cutting through the void. She was the first to see them, the Tsar fleet. 50,000 enemy ships appeared on the sensors, blocking the humans' path. They were spread wide, forming a wall of steel and fire. The Tsar ships were dark, jagged, and built for war. Their weapons arrays glowed faintly as they powered up. No messages came, no demands, just silence before the storm. On the Titan, Carter gave his orders. All ships engage Battle Plan Delta. Fighters, launch. In an instant, the quiet of space erupted. Hangar bays opened, and thousands of human fighters shot out into the dark, engines blazing. Missile pods unfolded from warship hulls, and railgun turrets began to track targets. From the Tsar side, bright lances of energy streaked toward the human lines. The first exchange was brutal. Several human frigates exploded under the opening barrage, their hulls torn apart in seconds. But the humans struck back with precision. Coordinated missile strikes slammed into the Tsar's front lines, tearing holes in their formation. Blake's cruisers darted in and out, unleashing heavy salvos before pulling back to safety. Captain Olivia Harper, aboard the dreadnought Resolute, fired the massive main gun. A bright beam of energy shot across the void, slicing a Tsar battleship clean in half. The crew cheered, but Harper kept her eyes on the tactical display. There were still thousands of enemy ships to fight. In the chaos of the dogfights, Marcus Hale found himself locked in a twisting battle with a Tsar fighter. The alien craft was fast, darting around his ship in tight loops. Marcus gritted his teeth, rolled hard to the left, and fired. The Tsar fighter exploded in a flash, and Marcus rejoined his squadron. The battle raged for hours. The humans pushed forward slowly, breaking the Tsar line piece by piece. The enemy fought with skill and fury, but they had not expected the sheer size of the human armada. Every time they regrouped, another wave of human ships came at them. Inside the Titan, Carter's voice stayed calm as he directed the massive operation. Group 6, flank left. Group 12, hold position. Dreadnought wing, advance. His orders kept the battle organized, turning the chaos into a controlled assault. By the 6th hour, the Tsar began to pull back. Their wall was shattered, their losses heavy. Human ships pursued, hammering the retreating enemy. But Carter called the order to halt the chase. Hold position, let them run. We've made our point. The aftermath was silent except for the chatter of damage reports. Hundreds of human ships were gone, and thousands of lives had been lost. Wreckage drifted in the darkness. Pieces of both human and Tsar vessels floating together in silence. On the Valar, Whitfield walked the damaged corridors, speaking with the wounded. Some smiled when they saw him, others could barely lift their heads. In the Titan's medbay, doctors worked without pause, saving who they could. Carter looked out at the scattered remains of the Tsar fleet. This was only their first line of defense, he said quietly to Harper. It will get harder from here. Harper nodded. And we'll be ready. The human fleet began to regroup, repairing what they could and tending to the injured. The victory was costly, but it had proven something important: the Tsar could be beaten. Word of the battle was already moving through the fleet, lifting spirits. The road to the Tsar homeworld would be long, but now every sailor, pilot, and soldier knew they could win. As the fleet moved deeper into enemy space, the memory of Hesperia burned bright in their minds. The dead would not be forgotten, and the Tsar would not escape justice. Asterisk, the battle was over. But the silence that followed was heavy. The great human fleet drifted in the aftermath, its formations scattered, its ships marked with scars from the fight. Here and there, wreckage floated in the void-twisted metal, broken engines, and the silent remains of ships that would never return to port. On the Titan's bridge, Admiral Daniel Carter listened to the steady stream of reports. The numbers were grim. Hundreds of ships had been lost, and thousands of crew members were gone. The med bays across the fleet were full, and repair crews were already working without rest. Carter's face was calm, but inside he felt the weight of every life lost. On the Valor, Captain Aaron Whitfield moved slowly through the damaged sections of his ship. Fire had blackened the walls in some corridors. In others, bulkheads had been sealed to keep the vacuum out. He stopped to speak with survivors, offering words that felt too small for the moment. Some smiled weakly, others stared in silence, still processing what had happened in the Resolute's medbay. Captain Olivia Harper watched as doctors fought to save the wounded. There were too many, and the supplies were already running low. She knelt beside a young crewman who had lost an arm, speaking softly to calm him. "You fought well," she said. "You'll see home again." She hoped her words would be true. Across the fleet, the dead were honored. Bodies recovered from drifting wreckage were brought aboard and placed in sealed chambers. Crews stood at attention as names were read, the silence broken only by the soft hum of the ship's systems. The ceremonies were brief. There was no time for long farewells, but each loss was felt. Admiral Carter gathered his senior officers for a meeting. The strategy room was quiet, except for the faint crackle of the holographic display. Red icons marked the ships that had been lost. Blue icons showed the survivors. Carter looked at the map for a long time before speaking. "We won the battle," he said, "but victory has a price. Every ship, every life we lost is another reason we must finish this mission. We cannot turn back." Rear Admiral Sophia Blake nodded. "The Tsar will be regrouping. They won't underestimate us again. We need to move before they can build another wall." The others agreed. The fleet could not afford to slow down. They would repair what they could while on the move. The mission was still the same: push deeper into Tsar space and strike at the heart of their power. In the quiet of her quarters, Harper recorded a message to send back to Earth. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were tired. "We have taken the first step," she said. "We have shown them that humanity will not run. We have paid in blood, but we are still here, and we will keep going." The message would be played on news broadcasts across human space. Families who had lost loved ones would hear it. Some would take comfort. Others would only feel the loss more deeply. But all would understand that the fight was not over. In the mess halls of the fleet, the mood was mixed. There was pride in what they had done, but also the sharp edge of grief. Sailors and pilots spoke quietly, sharing memories of friends who were gone. Laughter was rare, and when it came, it faded quickly. In one corner of the Valor's mess hall, Marcus Hale sat with his squadron. He had survived his first real battle. But the empty chairs at the table reminded him of those who hadn't. "They fought hard," he said quietly. "We'll make it count." His squadmates nodded in agreement. Out in the dark, repair crews worked on the damaged ships. They patched hulls, replaced weapons, and rerouted power systems. The glow of welding torches lit the void, tiny sparks in the endless black. Every hour mattered. Every repair brought them closer to the next fight. Carter stood once more on the Titan's bridge, watching the scattered pieces of the Tsar fleet drift away. They had been beaten, but not destroyed. He knew the next battles would be harder. The enemy would fight with even greater fury now that humanity had proven itself a threat. "Set course for the next target," Carter said. His voice was firm. Leaving no room for hesitation, the fleet began to move again. Engines flaring as the great armada pushed deeper into enemy space. Behind them lay the remains of the first battle. Ahead of them waited more danger, more loss, but also the chance to end the threat forever. The price of vengeance was high, but the fleet was willing to pay it. Every ship carried the memory of Hesperia, and now the memory of those lost in the first battle. The Tsar had taken much from humanity, but in doing so, they had forged something stronger than they could have imagined. The storm was still building, and it was not finished yet. The human fleet moved deeper into Tsar territory. Every jump took them farther from the safety of their own space and closer to the enemy's heart. The stars outside the viewports seemed colder here, the light dimmer. Enemy patrols appeared more often, but none could stand against the combined power of the armada. They were swept aside quickly, leaving wreckage behind. Admiral Daniel Carter studied the map of Tsar space. The next targets were not military fleets, but the worlds that kept those fleets alive, the industrial systems. Massive shipyards, weapons factories, and supply depots powered the Tsar war machine. Destroy them, and the enemy's strength would begin to crumble. Rear Admiral Sophia Blake led the first strike group. Her cruisers and destroyers jumped ahead of the main force, moving fast and silent. Their target was the Tsar capital shipyards in the Vorthen system, a place where enemy battleships were built and repaired. Intelligence reports said the shipyards were heavily defended, but if they fell, the Tsar would lose much of their ability to replace their war losses. As Blake's fleet approached, the shipyards came into view. Great rings of steel floated in, orbit around a gas giant, each one big enough to hold a city. Half-built warships hung inside the rings, their skeletal frames glowing under construction lights. Cargo haulers moved between them like worker ants. The defenders spotted the humans and moved to intercept. Thousands of Tsar ships launched from hidden docks, but Blake's attack was already underway. Her voice was calm over the comms. All ships, engage. Strike teams, target the shipyard cores. The cruisers surged forward, unleashing waves of missiles and plasma fire. Explosions lit up the darkness as Tsar ships tried to block the attack. Human fighters darted through the chaos, diving toward the shipyard structures. One by one, the great rings were torn apart, their frames twisting and breaking in massive fireballs. In another sector, Captain Olivia Harper commanded a precision strike against the factories on the moon of Yethra. Her dreadnought, the Resolute, led the bombardment. Orbital cannons on the surface opened fire, but Harper's gunners answered with deadly accuracy. Within minutes, the enemy guns were silent, and landing craft descended to finish the job. The factories that had built weapons for decades were reduced to rubble. The Tsar fought fiercely, but the humans did not slow down. Every industrial world they reached was hit hard. Fuel depots erupted in towering flames. Supply convoys were destroyed before they could scatter. In some places, civilians were evacuated when possible, but often the enemy gave no chance for mercy. The war left little room for hesitation. On the Valor, Captain Aaron Whitfield's crew intercepted a heavily guarded transport convoy. At first, they thought it was carrying weapons, but scans showed it was loaded with food and supplies for the Tsar home fleets. Whitfield made the call to destroy it. The explosion lit the darkness, and though no one spoke of it aloud, the crew understood the hard truth: cutting off the enemy's lifelines meant fewer human lives lost in the battles to come. Back on the Titan, Carter listened to the victory reports. Each target destroyed weakened the Tsar, but he also heard the losses. Every strike cost ships and lives. The deeper they pushed, the harder the fighting became. The Tsar were beginning to understand that the humans were not simply raiding. They were dismantling their power piece by piece. In the strategy room, Carter met with Blake, Harper, and Whitfield over a secure link. The holographic display showed the growing trail of destruction the fleet had left behind. "They can't replace these losses quickly," Blake said. "If we keep the pressure on, their fleets will have to fight with what they already have." Harper's tone was firm. The factories and shipyards are only part of it. We need to hit their command centers, cut off their coordination, and the rest will fall apart. Carter agreed. The next phase will take us to their capital sector. That's where they'll make their stand. As the fleet prepared for the next jump, the crews worked with renewed focus. They had seen what their strikes could do. The Tsar were no longer an untouchable enemy. Their war machine could bleed, and humanity was making sure it did in the quiet hours before departure. Marcus Hale sat in the Valor's hangar, looking at his fighter. He thought of Hesperia, of the Friends he had lost in the first battle, and of the worlds they had just freed from Tsar control. He tightened his gloves and whispered to himself, one step closer. When the order came, the armada moved again, engines flaring in unison. The Tsar's outer defenses were shattered. Their factories burned, their shipyards lay in ruins, and their supply lines were broken. But the greatest battle was still ahead. Somewhere beyond the next jump lay the heart of the Tsar Confederacy, and humanity was coming for it. Asterisk. The Tsar Confederacy had been pushed back again and again. Their fleets were shattered, their factories burned, and their supply lines cut. Now, only one place remained their homeworld, Tsar Prime. A blue-green jewel hanging in space. It was protected by the last and strongest fleet the Tsar could gather. They knew this was their final stand. The human armada emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system. 700,000 ships formed into battle lines, their hulls glinting. In the light of the distant sun, Admiral Daniel Carter stood on the Titan's bridge, eyes fixed on the image of Tsar Prime on the main display. Between them and the planet floated a wall of enemy ships, hundreds of thousands strong. They've brought everything they have. Left, Captain Olivia Harper said quietly beside him. Carter nodded. So have we. The Tsar fleet was arranged in tight defensive formations. Massive capital ships sat in the center, surrounded by cruisers, destroyers, and swarms of fighters. Defense platforms orbited the planet, their weapons already warming up. Every gun, every missile, every fighter was ready. On the Valor, Captain Aaron Whitfield addressed his crew over the ship's intercom. This is it, the battle that will decide everything. Remember Hesperia. Remember why we fight. We win here, and our people will be safe. In the hangar, Marcus Hale sat in his fighter, checking every system. Around him, pilots gave each other quiet nods. No one needed to speak. They all knew what was coming. Admiral Carter gave the order. All ships advance. The human fleet surged forward. Engines flared bright, and the void between the two armadas closed. When the first weapons fired, the darkness lit up like a storm. Railgun slugs and energy beams streaked through space, smashing into shields and tearing through hulls. Explosions bloomed like fiery flowers. Fighters clashed in the middle of the battlefield, weaving and rolling as they tried to outmaneuver each other. Marcus's squadron dove into the enemy lines, guns blazing. He took out 2 enemy fighters before a missile lock warning screamed in his headset. Rolling hard, he barely dodged the shot, then lined up his own and fired. Rear Admiral Sophia Blake's strike cruisers darted along the flanks, cutting through enemy formations with rapid, coordinated strikes. Her voice was steady over the comms, as she directed her captains to press every advantage. The Tsar fought with desperate fury, but the humans pushed harder. On the Titan, Carter issued rapid orders. Dreadnought Wing, target the defense platforms. Carrier groups, launch full strike waves. Keep their fighters busy. The Titan's own massive guns fired again and again, each shot tearing through enemy capital ships. The battle raged for hours. Ships on both sides exploded, filling space with drifting wreckage. The Tsar refused to retreat, holding their positions even as their numbers fell. The humans pressed forward step by step, the gap between them and Tsar Prime slowly closing. On The resolute Harper saw an opening. "Concentrate fire on that battleship cluster," she ordered. Her gunners focused their shots, and one by one the enemy ships fell apart under the barrage. The gap they created allowed a squadron of human bombers to break through and strike. Another defense platform, Marcus Hale's fighter, was damaged, warning lights flashing red across his console. Still, he stayed in the fight, covering his wingmate as they made a run on an enemy cruiser. They fired in perfect sync, and the cruiser exploded in a burst of light. Finally, the enemy lines began to collapse, with their defense platforms destroyed. And their capital ships falling, the Tsar fleet had no way to hold back the human advance. But still, they fought to the last ship, unwilling to surrender. Carter's voice was calm, but resolute. "All units, push through. End this." The final minutes were brutal. Ship after ship on both sides went up in flames. But the human fleet kept moving forward, and soon the last Tsar vessels were drifting wrecks. The path to Tsar Prime was open. Silence fell across the Combs as the enemy's last guns went quiet. The once mighty Tsar fleet was gone. Wreckage floated in the darkness, lit only by the distant sun and the fires of burning ships. Carter stood on the Titan's bridge, looking at the image of Tsar Prime. "It's over," he said softly. Harper nodded. "We've won." Ally victory had come at a cost. Thousands of human ships were gone. Countless lives had been lost, but the mission was complete. The Tsar's power was broken, and humanity had proven that it would not be defeated. The fleet began to move into orbit around Tsar Prime, ready to ensure that the enemy could never again threaten another human world. For the first time since Hesperia, there was hope that the war was truly ending. The greatest battle in human history had been for Tandwan. The war was over. The human fleet now orbited Tsar Prime, watching the once proud homeworld of their enemy spin slowly below. The skies above the planet were quiet for the first time in years. No fleets remained to defend it. No defense platforms to fire back. The Tsar Confederacy was broken. Admiral Daniel Carter stood on the Titan's observation deck. Looking down at the blue-green world, he felt no joy, only relief. The cost had been too high to celebrate. Too many ships were gone, too many names would never be heard again. But the mission had been completed. Humanity was safe for now. In the city of Korthon on Tsar Prime, the Tsar leaders were brought to meet with Carter and his commanders. They walked slowly, their heads low. Once they had spoken with arrogance, calling humans weak and unworthy of the stars. Now their voices were quiet. They agreed to terms without argument. They would surrender their weapons, their fleets, and their factories. They would never again raise arms against Earth. Captain Olivia Harper of the Resolute watched from her ship as transports moved between the surface and the human fleet. Supplies and medical aid were sent down to help civilians. The war had been against the Tsar military, not their people. Harper made sure her crew understood that. "We fought soldiers," she told them, "not the families who just want to live in peace." On the Valor, Captain Aaron Whitfield gathered his crew in the hangar. Many stood with bandaged arms or faces marked with burns. Some stared at the floor, thinking of friends who had not returned. Whitfield spoke simply. "We did what we had to do. We stood when they thought we would fall. And because of that, billions of lives are safe. That is what matters." Marcus Hale stepped out of his damaged fighter and looked around. Rows of ships bore the scars of the final battle. Some would never fly again. He ran a hand along the side of his craft and thought of the friends he had lost over Hesperia and Tsar Prime. The war was done, but the memories would never fade in. The following days, the human fleet began to withdraw. Some ships stayed behind to keep the peace, but most turned toward home. The journey back was slower. The tension gone, replaced with quiet exhaustion. Messages from Earth poured in cheers, thanks, and stories of hope returning to places that had lived in fear for years. On the Titan's bridge, Carter received a direct message from Earth's council. His orders were simple: return home, bring the fleet back, and rest. But he knew the galaxy was wide and filled with dangers. The humans had shown their strength, but others might be watching as the fleet traveled back through the stars. The crews began to talk about the future. For years, they had lived only for the next battle, the next mission. Now they spoke of families, of rebuilding, of seeing the skies above Earth without the shadow of war. Harper spent long hours in her quarters, reading reports of the worlds freed from Tsar control. Cities that had been bombed were rebuilding. Trade routes were opening again. For the first time in a long while, there was movement toward peace. Whitfield walked through the Valor's corridors, speaking with crew members one by one. He wanted them to understand their place in history, that they had stood against one of the greatest threats humanity had ever faced and had prevailed. When the Armada finally approached the Sol system, the sight of Earth filled every view screen. The blue oceans and green lands seemed brighter than anyone remembered. As they descended into orbit, ships in the defense fleet saluted them. On the surface, millions waited to welcome them home. Carter stood before his officers and spoke the words that marked the end of their long journey. We came together as one people. We faced an enemy that thought we could be broken. We proved them wrong. The war is over, but our duty remains to protect what we have built and to honor those who gave everything to keep it safe. That night, lights shone in cities across Earth. The celebrations were not for victory alone, but for survival. The stars were quiet again. But every human who had served in the war knew the truth: the peace would last only as long as they were ready to defend it. On a quiet balcony in New York, Marcus Hale looked up at the night sky. Somewhere out there were countless other worlds, some friendly, some not. But tonight, the stars looked peaceful. He raised a glass to the friends he had lost, and to the hope that their sacrifice had given. The galaxy had learned a lesson. Humanity might be young among the stars, but it would never bow to those who sought to destroy it. And if another threat ever came, Earth's fleets would rise again, ready to fight, ready to protect, ready to endure. For now, though the war was over, and the long road home was complete. Asterix.